Welcome, everybody. I'm here with my friend Ashley Waite. She is from Medina, Ohio, and she is with the Grief Wellness Group. And Ashley is building the world's first on-demand mobile app for grief support. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So Ashley and I met at Half Moon Yoga in Medina, and we just hit it off right away. I think I met you at the breathwork class, right? Yeah, that's awesome. And I just absolutely love your work with grief and everything that you're doing. And even when you just told me that this is the world's first, it just blew my mind. That's amazing.
It's blowing my own mind. It's so exciting to be in this time creating something for grieving people. Western culture just has a really unique way of guiding people through the grief process. We've kind of learned throughout this work that grief is not linear, and it's actually something that's chronic. And while that can sound very daunting for people in grief, I think it's just a fact that we all need to be comfortable with. A lot of people believe that grief ends around the 1-year mark, but for many grieving individuals, they will share that grief lasts as long as love does. It lasts your entire lifetime. A lot of people equate this to ocean waves. In the first early days of grief, it can just feel like the tsunami of waves kind of crashing over you. And as you go throughout time, you learn to integrate that loss into your life, and those waves just lessen. It just kind of becomes an undercurrent of your life. So it's an exciting time to be building this, especially with the state of our world right now with coronavirus. This idea isn't something that's new to me. It's been on my heart for quite a while to develop. And initially I wanted to go into this space and bring something locally for our community. And it was in July when I had this overwhelming, like almost voice, I would say, telling me like where the grieving people at, meet them where they're at. And I kept coming to this fact of people are in their homes, and, and this is not something that's just during coronavirus. When you're initially in those first early days of grief, and especially for more traumatic losses, it can be really hard to lift yourself out of bed in the morning. It can be hard to brush your teeth. It can be hard to find energy to even eat. So a lot of these like basic life tasks become so overwhelming for a person to do. And I just kept thinking, how do we work with grieving people? We often suggest therapy as like a first form of intervention. And when you're meeting with a therapist, they might suggest these wonderful, like complementary modalities to support somebody through grief. So they might say, like, I want you to be mindful of the foods that you're eating. They might suggest like yoga or meditation. And so when you're grieving, there is a flood of hormones that can flood your brain. So instead of saying like your heart is broken, we actually should say that your brain is broken, especially in grief. So cortisone is a hormone that's released. This is our stress hormone. And these neurochemicals just flood the brain and flood the body and with stress. And so when you're stressed, there are so many, different body factors that are affected. And a lot of those, can be like the daily tasks that are so hard to do. And so when you're grieving and you're meeting with your therapist, they'll suggest these wonderful, modalities. And to think about engaging in them is just so much harder. It's so much harder for a person to do. And all of these areas are siloed. So you might have to download a Headspace app or go to a yoga studio. And I kept thinking, how do we create a solution that has everything synthesized into one space, so a grieving person doesn't have to go out and expend all that energy and that time to go find these wonderful resources. So I really kept thinking, how can I bring this solution that's on demand and meet people where they're at and they're in their home. So I'm really excited to be developing this for people during this time.
Yeah. I love what you said about the tsunami in those first couple of days of grief.
Yeah.
I could definitely relate to that. Like the deepest grief I felt was like the very sudden loss of my dog. And like, just for that first 4 or 5 days, all I could really do was just like stare at my wall. I didn't want to watch TV. I didn't want to do anything but just stare at my wall. And I didn't want to eat. nothing. And then it does start to like lessen, but sometimes the waves get a little bit bigger, and or sometimes they're nice and calm. It all depends. And I totally think too that once grief has been placed in our life, it's something that's just always going to be there in some capacity.
Yeah. And, you know, and this is something that Lauren and I have kind of worked through in my own life. For me personally, I've been through a number of traumatic losses in my life. The first one was when I was 11 years old, and a father-like figure passed away very unexpectedly. And I never really had the opportunity to grieve that. And I realized that I kind of shut out people in my life because I was so scared to feel that heartbreak again. It felt so vulnerable to open myself up to anyone else after that period of time. In subsequent years, we lost a family member on 9/11. He was on Flight 93 and helped take back the cockpit of the airplane. So terrorism. We've just had a child loss has been another area that our family, the Waite family, has been affected by. And it's just, you go through these experiences, and for some people, like, they can stuff them. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was a stuffer of my emotions. And I realized, you know, like, for so many people, we focus on grief in the headspace, and we'll, you know, just think of it as like something's like wrong with the mind. But we don't really, you know, make that connection with the mind and the body. And it wasn't until I found like breath work with Lauren, to like really kind of like integrate those losses into my life and like release them. Because for me, I was holding them in my body. And it first started with Emdr Therapy, which was a wonderful way for me to access these traumas that I had stored in my body, but didn't know I had done so at the time. And for many people, like, you can have somatic responses, which I don't think is something that many people talk about. And so when I started accessing like EMDR and breath work, I was able to have a full body release. And Lauren would tell you, it almost looks like I'm having a seizure on the floor when like these motions are kind of like working through my body. So I just think it's really important that in the solutions that I'm creating, so what I'm looking at doing is not just focusing on the clinical side of grief. I will be having a platform where we'll have counselors and health coaches to kind of be the guides for people, but also including like these wonderful body supports. So things like yoga, or even grief yoga, breath work, meditation, even different movements to just help people, you know, make that mind body connection and to work through their grief in like a very comprehensive, holistic way. So like, there's this whole school of thought that says trauma lives in the body. And Lawrence has talked about this so much. But when you've experienced it firsthand, it's not something that goes from like the woo-woo element of things. Like, it's just, you're like, yes, this is real. And, you know, I didn't really realize, you know, the power of that. So it's just been a fascinating experience for myself, kind of making that connection and just now saying, we've got a problem and I want to like help people work through their grief in a very comprehensive, holistic way. So a very personalized approach to grief care. And I think that's important. Grief is not, and it's not an experience that is the same for every single person. You know, Lauren and I, let's say, could have lost the same person to us, but we will have a fully different experience with our grief and how we work through that. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah. And that embodied approach is such a compassionate and gentle approach as well. Because when we come at these emotions with only our mind, because the emotion is a body-based experience. And so when it's only from the mind, it just almost kind of feels like we're just in this hamster wheel of talking about it, like noticing it, talking about it, noticing it, talking about it. And it never really has space to move to, which, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with talk therapy. I think it's amazing. I have my background with cognitive behavioral therapy as well for a reason, but then bringing in the body part of it as well to allow it to be that energy in motion, to feel it move through you, to experience it in that way, and to like still feel yourself here and whole and supported. And also that ability to notice that you can choose to take your awareness to a different part of the body. You can choose to kind of like feel differently, to feel in control of your experience in your body. It's very, it's so freeing for that person who's moving through those emotions.
Yeah, it's a radical way of looking at group support. And, you know, Dr. Kubler-Ross, you know, she came up with this model for grief and for the bereaved. But this model actually was developed for people that had like chronic illness, and that was terminal. So it was never at all supposed to be developed as a model for people going through grief. Yet our country has like kind of held on to it and saying like, I'm going to go through like these linear stages. But it's really not that way at all. You know, you kind of, it's almost like spaghetti noodles. Like it's just kind of all tied and twisted and turned around. It's not like a linear progression. And I think the more that we, you know, bring awareness to that and help people, you know, with this embodied approach, we're just going to help people in a more like comprehensive way, and just it's a better way of helping people work through their grief. And I don't think a lot of people also realize that grief is something that can affect all 12 systems of our body, you know, from the immune system to your cardiovascular system, to your digestive system, to your nervous system. A lot of people report like headaches or fatigue or disturbed sleep, even like reduced your inability to like fight off infections. Some people will have increased blood pressure or chest pain, and all of these things are normal in the grieving process. It's when we get stuck in that fight or flight response that we can develop, you know, full on chronic disease. So I'm really interested in taking grief as like a root cause approach to all chronic disease. And at the end of the day, I think it's like a public health emergency that nobody is talking about, is like unresolved grief, unresolved trauma. And so how do we really companion people through these experiences in a way that addresses the root cause of their, you know, manifestations of their disease or whatever.
So great. In the corporate world, you get 3 days off of work, and that's for a close family member, an immediate family member. 3 days, and then you're expected just to get back to work and get back at it, move on. It just, there's no compassion in that, and it takes much longer than 3 days. Like it's not taken seriously enough.
No, it's not. And, you know, and initially when I had developed this idea, I was going to go the corporate wellness route just because I was so passionate about it. But I really kept coming back to the grieving individuals, and I want to have that be my focus at the very first iteration of this project. But yeah, 3 days is not enough for any person grieving any type of loss. And a lot of times it doesn't even include a pet loss, like for yourself. And for so many people, their pets become their extended members of their family. You know, and when we've had child loss in our family, like thankfully, like their employers were able to take that situation and give them the time and grace to help process. So that's wonderful. But I think like overall, especially in corporate America, you're given those 3 days, expected to come back, you know, to work fully ready to go, fully ready to function. And for many people, they just kind of bury themselves, you know, a little bit. And it's not okay. And we have to have, you know, more open conversations with their supervisors. Just, you know, how do we support as like a corporate culture? How do we support people through the grieving process? And, you know, and not stigmatize people, because a lot of people will fear that, that they'll lose their job, you know, because they are grieving, instead of just saying, this is an experience we're all going to go through in our entire life. How do we like show compassion for somebody going through that? And it's, you know, and in the Western culture, it's tough to talk about. Like we have a very much lift yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And I think we just need to like break it back to the basics and just, you know, show people love and giving them the space and time to remember their person and to honor that loss, and to create rituals, you know, around those times as well. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done. It's just ultimately a lot of education.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially grieving outside of losing a person or an animal, like grief can be for any loss. So we're in a collective grief right now. I know even I've had feelings of grief for thinking about what my kids might not get to experience because we don't know what's going to happen next. Grief and people losing their businesses and losing their livelihoods and losing their homes. I mean, just a grief in the normalcy of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are definitely seeing that in a time, people are grieving their loss of normalcy, and just all the daily things that we used to do pre-COVID. We're living in a time that is very unfamiliar, and that can be so unsettling for people. So yes, grief is not just the loss of a physical person. It can be all of these other secondary losses that we're not talking too much about. But ultimately, I do think, we're starting to see some shifts with COVID, which I'm thankful for in a way. And I say that lightly, but I am seeing grief being elevated in the news cycles more so than I ever have in my work in the last 10 years. And that's exciting to see, like, these open conversations happening with people, and, the grief education that's coming out of it. How do we support people going through this time? And ultimately, I think, like, we have moved the needle a little bit. It's taken a global pandemic and an insurmountable loss of life. And for that, I am so sorry for anybody that's experienced a loss during this time. And our family owns funeral homes in Medina County, and we've seen this firsthand. And our hearts go out to anybody that's grieving during a pandemic without the supports of your loved ones, without those meals that you're used to receiving, or the hugs, the physical touch. Our grief rituals were virtually changed overnight, and people are kind of left grappling, alone and in isolation. And that's never how we were supposed to grieve. We were supposed to grieve, as a people group, as a community together. So I really think this solution that I'm working on building right now will help people, and to be able to meet that need and meet them where they're at. Currently just finished a prototype, which is really, really exciting, and hope to release the first iteration within the next month. So if anybody's interested in signing up or registering, you can find me. I'm sure Lauren will share my information, at the end of this podcast, but there is a wait list, and I would love to have people join us in that effort.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be so good. It's so good. Yeah. So your ownership of funeral homes in the area, is that what got you into this grief work?
It was, initially I didn't think that that's where I would end up. Interesting story. So I'm from San Diego, California, and I don't know if anybody remembers, probably about your junior or senior year, you take these career aptitude tests. My top 2 recommendations came back as funeral director, and yeah, and as an RN. And I always wanted to be an RN, and I figured I'd go into the healthcare space. When the funeral director popped up, I thought, that is so weird. And in California, you have to understand, our rituals with death are just a little bit different than kind of like the middle of America. So growing up, when I had experienced these losses in my life, we would have a remembrance of life ceremony, and the person would be cremated. And I didn't realize how that had affected me at all as a person until my husband's grandmother passed away, probably about 12 years ago. And I saw her body for the very first time. And I walked through that process of seeing her and saying, like, she is clearly no longer here. Her body is clearly a vessel for her personality, her life, all of her accomplishments. And I'd never seen a body before. So this was just like a shock to my system a little bit. And, we got in the cars and we had the whole funeral procession. So we had that element of community that was like fully on display for everybody else in our community to see. And we got to the gravesite, and, you see the casket, over the ground and the earth, and then you see it lowered and, the dirt put on top, and you have that full sense of like finality, that full sense of closure. And I had never in my life had that closure before. I still to this day have people that have passed away. I have their phone numbers in my phone, because I never realized, like, my brain almost can't comprehend that they're actually gone, especially with the loss of young people who are my age. One of my friends, Jamie from high school, I still have her phone number in there. And it was when I went to the service, I saw a picture, and hadn't seen her in quite some time. So my brain just never registered that, like, this is done. Like, she's never coming back. so, you know, back to, you know, what kind of brought me to this space, like I've just had like this full circle experience. And, you know, initially I thought the death care space was super creepy. It was just not something that we really talked about in California. It was just done so differently. And so when my husband shared that he was in the funeral industry, I was like, doesn't your family have a candle company in Medina County? Like, can't you go do that instead? Just because it was just so unique for me. But I've come to realize like what a gift it is, the work that they do, to be able to carry, you know, people's grief with them, you know, with so many families that they interact with on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis. And so I really started to see these gaps in the way that we were caring for people just as a business. And we didn't have a bereavement center at all established during this time. And so my personality tends to be one where I see something, I feel like I have to like kind of get my hands in it and solve it per se. So I saw this area that was wide open for innovation, and I love like building things from the ground up. And so I thought, you know, what can I do here? How can I help people move through this grief experience? And I started creating interactive bereavement installations in our community, which have really taken off and have since been replicated around the country, which is very exciting. And then throughout the last 2 years, started bringing in these holistic elements. So like restorative yoga, warm stone, restorative yoga for grief, songwriting, journaling, like a local grief resource night, which our wonderful friend, Christy, mutual friend of ours, she leads at our funeral home. And we're just, you know, trying to meet people where they're at. And, you know, that's really where the story began of how I just kind of fell in love with the heartbroken and just walking people through the most common experience that like threads us all together. And how can we do this better? Like we can't take away your pain. I know that. But how can we really companion people through this experience in a way that is gentle and, you know, comprehensive and addresses all of the elements of grief instead of just this one area. So for me in my app, you know, what I'm creating is I'm essentially taking like a BetterHelp app. So like a mental health therapy app meets a fitness app, you know, and they're going to have a baby and it's going to be a grief baby. And so we're like bringing this marriage together. And that's essentially what it is. So, you know, I'm really interested in the intersections of nutrition, the body-based therapies, you know, the clinical side of grief support, and just bringing them all together under one platform so people can, you know, not have to do the extra work of accessing like siloed providers. It's all just there with one click, and it meets them where they're at. So, and at the end of the day, you know, I do believe in so much of people having those face-to-face interactions. I was really skeptical of my own work when I was coming into this, you know, just because there is power in meeting face-to-face and feeling the energy in that room and the connection. And but we're in a unique time right now, and I really think it's important to meet people where they're at. And if they're in their homes and it's hard to leave, like we shouldn't make grief any harder for people. So yeah, I'm very, very, very excited. I'm very overwhelmed in bringing it to fruition, but I'm here for it. And it's happening. And kind of the doors are just kind of opening, and the right people are coming into play. But it's very, very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it just showing that those nerves that you're feeling, and just proving that you're a human, having a human experience, and that all your operating systems are working fully.
I mean, and building something like this during a pandemic, especially while having my kids home from school, is taking so much effort. And like, I don't know, it's just, if I wasn't passionate about it, I wouldn't be doing it. Just because it's so hard, especially during this time. But, you know, I really think it's something that people deserve. And, you know, I'm apparently going to be the one to bring it, you know, here, which is exciting
for it. And I like, as you were talking, I know exactly why we click so well, because you made that comment about pretty much like seeing what's not in existence, but you know is needed. And so instead of like, well, looking outside, you're like, well, I'm gonna create it.
Exactly.
Exactly how I look at like everything that I do, everything I've created within my business or just in my life, even, it's just been like, what's missing, like what could make this better, what could provide more support, I'm gonna do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially if it doesn't exist, and I'm all about like collaboration, and I love like those elements of it. But if it's not there, I'm never going to be the one to just say, well, someone else should build it. Though I did in the very beginning, I did try and take the idea, and I was like, go find a new home. This is too big for me. Like, I actually really don't like tech, like, to be totally honest. I was a late adapter to the iPhone. My husband and I this morning, I was having issues trying to log on to an appointment. So I'm like the least techie person to be bringing this to fruition, which just cracks me up at the end of the day. But I think sometimes we have these experiences in life where it's just, why not us? Why not me? If this is the idea that's meant to be, like, it'll just kind of show itself, and so far it's showing up for me, and it's showing up in this world, and, the right players are coming in. But yeah, it's so wild. So yeah, I think that's exactly why we must have clicked, is we're the doers and the shakers and the dreamers, and we're here for it.
Yeah. Do you know anything about human design at all? Do you happen to know?
I have like this much. That's it. I have had a friend mention it to me, but I don't know anything about it.
You don't know what your design is?
No.
Okay. I'm going to send you the link for it when we get off here. I'm just curious if you're also a manifestor, because I'm a manifestor as well.
Yeah.
Which is manifestors like create the energy. If we lived in like this perfect world ran by like how our design is, it'd be like the manifestors with all like the ideas of like the creations, and then we have then like the people who want to just go out there and like really make it, bring it into fruition. So it's really cool to like see that. So I'll send it to you, see what you are.
Yeah, I'll be curious. So with those types of personality profiles, etc., that are based upon like your date of birth and those types of things and the time that you were born at. I'm a triplet, and so I was just pulled out first. So I'm just like, how does this like play in for like C-sections or multiples and like those types of things. So it's always so fascinating to learn more about who we are as people and why we work in the way that we do. And yeah, I'm always been so fascinated by those types of things. So I'd love to see it.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up, I just wanted to ask if you could give anybody a piece of advice for just experiencing the emotion of grief right now, what would it be?
I would say just be gentle with yourself. Know that it's not a linear process. Know that grief is just going to be a part of your life. It's not always going to be this hard or this difficult, and you will survive this. It may feel like it. It may feel like you can't get through this time, but we all have the tools within us to, move through these experiences. So, as like a first step, I would say, set an alarm on your phone to get out of bed and take a lap around the house. Maybe brush your teeth that day. Consider taking a shower. I think we can start really, really, really small. Instead of, grabbing something from the pantry that's not as healthy, consider making a smoothie and incorporating like fruits and vegetables and different foods that you can get like very, very quickly, and those nutrients in your body. So start small, prioritize your health, and know that it won't always be this bad.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. I mean, I remember telling my husband, like in the first couple of days of my grief, I was like, I am worried I'm never going to feel happy again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Never thought, because you're so just deep in it, and I'm here to tell you, I have felt happiness again,
Yeah. And, and I think like there's certain losses that will take that lifetime, just knowing that a piece of your heart is missing, especially with child loss or the loss of a spouse. Like those two losses in particular can just really bring a person to their knees for a very, very, very long period of time. And, we move forward integrating that loss with us, and so I would just say, like, just continue to be gentle with yourself and take those micro movements and micro habits and just kind of implement them into your life, and just know it's not going to always be this terrible.
Yeah. Well, and yes, all of your information will be below in all the show notes and descriptions below. But if you just want to give us a little highlight to how we can find you.
Yeah, so I can be found on Instagram and Facebook at Grief Wellness Group. I also can be found online at www.griefwellnessgroup.com. I have a wait list going for our app, which is very exciting. So if this is something that piques your interest at all, feel free to add yourself to the wait list. You'll receive, an email back that will guide you to our social media accounts where you can find really helpful information to guide you until the release of this product.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so exciting. It's going to be just beautiful work. It's so needed for everybody. I mean, literally everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.